What are you doing here?
I'm working. This is my store. Is there a problem?
Your store?
officer?
This is your store?
Yes, Savannah Fine Jewelry. I'm the owner.
How'd you get in here?
I unlocked the door with my key because I own the store.
That license says Loretta Caldwell owns this place.
That was my aunt. She passed away in 2017. She left the business.
Yes.
Officer Curtis Brennan was patrolling the upscale shops on Peachtree Road in Buckhead, Atlanta, on the afternoon of March 12, 2025, when he glanced through the window of Savannah Fine Jewelry and saw a black man standing behind the counter with an open display case full of diamonds in front of him. He walked into that store with his hand on his weapon, accused the man of robbery in progress, and refused to believe him when he said he owned the business, dismissing his explanations and preparing to arrest him for theft and trespassing in his own store. What Officer Brennan didn't know was that the man he was handcuffing had owned that jewelry store for 8 years after inheriting it from his aunt, who'd built it over 3 decades, that the store's security system was recording every second of his racist assumptions, and that his refusal to do even basic verification before making an arrest was about to cost him his badge, his career, and his freedom. This story is going to blow your mind. Hit that like button and subscribe to Cops Cam Archives right now, because what happens next is absolutely insane. Savannah Fine Jewelry sat at 3215 Peachtree Road in the heart of Buckhead, Atlanta's wealthiest shopping district, sandwiched between a boutique that sold $1,000 handbags and a restaurant where dinner for two cost more than most people's monthly car payments. The storefront had floor-to-ceiling windows that let natural light flood the interior, illuminating the carefully arranged displays of diamond rings, gold bracelets, luxury watches, and custom pieces that had been designed in the small workshop in the back. The store had been there for 32 years, long enough that some of the other business owners on the block remembered when it first opened, back when Buckhead was still transitioning from old Atlanta money to new luxury retail. Augustus had worked in that store since he was 15 years old. His Aunt Loretta had opened Savannah Fine Jewelry in 1993, with savings she'd accumulated over 2 decades working as a seamstress and doing alterations for wealthy clients who trusted her with their expensive clothes. She'd started small, selling estate jewelry and doing repairs, building a reputation for honest dealing and quality work that eventually allowed her to expand into custom designs and high-end pieces. Augustus had swept floors after school, learned to clean jewelry, watched his aunt work with customers, and eventually learned the craft himself under her patient teaching. When Loretta passed away from cancer 8 years ago, she'd left the business to Augustus in her will. He'd been 29 at the time, already working full-time at the store, already trusted by the longtime customers who'd watched him grow up. He'd kept everything exactly as his aunt had built it, the same commitment to quality, the same personal service, the same integrity. The store's reputation had only grown. Augustus was now 37, well known in Atlanta's jewelry community, a member of the Buckhead Business Association, someone who'd appraised pieces for insurance companies and estate sales. He'd expanded the custom design work, brought in a second jeweler to help with the increased demand, and maintain the legacy his aunt had built. The only problem was the paperwork. When Loretta died, the business had gone into her estate. The probate process had taken time, and then there had been complications with the title transfer because the building's ownership had been structured through a trust. Augustus had been operating the business the entire time, legally and legitimately, but the official business registration and the property deed still showed Loretta's name. His attorney had assured him it would all be finalized soon, that these delays were normal with estate transfers, that everything was properly documented and legal. It just hadn't been updated in the city and state databases yet. On the afternoon of March 12th, Augustus was in the store alone. His assistant jeweler had the day off, and Miranda, the sales associate who worked afternoons, wasn't scheduled to arrive until 3. It was just past 2 in the afternoon, a quiet Tuesday, the kind of day where Augustus could catch up on paperwork and work on a custom engagement ring he was designing for a client. He had the ring in front of him on the counter, along with several loose diamonds he was considering for the setting, trying to match the specifications the client had given him for color and clarity. He was examining one of the diamonds with a jeweler's loupe when he noticed someone standing outside the window. A police officer in Atlanta PD uniform, white guy, maybe late 30s, standing on the sidewalk staring into the store. Augustus looked up, made brief eye contact, and went back to his work. Police walk past all the time, Buckhead had regular patrols. It wasn't unusual. But the officer didn't walk past. He stood there for another moment, his hand moving to rest on his service weapon, and then he pushed through the door and walked directly toward the counter. Augustus looked up again and straightened, setting down the loop. "Good afternoon, officer. Can I help you with something?" Curtis Brennan's eyes moved from Augustus to the open display case, to the diamonds on the counter, to the keys sitting next to the cash register. His expression was already hard, already suspicious. "What are you doing here?" Augustus frowned slightly at the tone. "I'm working. This is my store. Is there a problem?" "Your store," Brennan repeated, and there was disbelief in his voice that was impossible to miss. "This is your store." "Yes," Augustus said calmly. "Savannah Fine Jewelry. I'm the owner, Augustus. Is there something I can help you with?" Brennan looked around the store, his eyes moving over the expensive displays, the organized workspace behind the counter, the professional setup that clearly showed this was an established business. "How'd you get in here?" The question landed wrong. Augustus felt the first flutter of real concern in his chest. "I unlocked the door with my key, because I own the store. What's this about?" "I need to see some identification," Brennan said, his hand still on his weapon. Augustus reached slowly for his wallet, keeping his movements visible and unthreatening, and pulled out his driver's license. He handed it across the counter. Brennan took it and studied it for a long moment. "This says Augustus Caldwell," Brennan said. "That's my name," Augustus said. "Who owns this store?" "I do," Augustus said, and his voice was still patient, but his eyes had sharpened. He was starting to understand what was happening here. "I inherited it from my aunt 8 years ago." Brennan pulled out his phone and took a photo of Augustus's license. Then he walked to the wall where the business license was framed and displayed, a legal requirement for any retail establishment in Atlanta. He looked at it, and his jaw tightened. "This says the owner is Loretta Caldwell." "That was my aunt," Augustus explained, keeping his voice level. "She passed away in 2017. She left the business to me. The estate is still being processed, so the registration hasn't been fully updated yet. It's a legal transfer. It's just taking time with probate." Brennan turned back to him with an expression that made it clear he didn't believe a word of it. "So you're telling me you just inherited a jewelry store?" "Yes," Augustus said. "That's exactly what I'm telling you. And I have documentation to prove it if you'd like to see it." "I'd like to see it," Brennan said flatly. Augustus moved carefully to the desk in the corner behind the counter, aware that the officer's hand was still near his weapon, and pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of his aunt's will, the probate court documents, the estate transfer paperwork, his business insurance policy that listed him as the owner, tax returns showing the business income under his name. He brought the folder to the counter and opened it, spreading the documents out. Brennan barely looked at them. He glanced at the first page, then pushed the folder aside. "These could be fake?" Augustus stared at him. "They're from the Fulton County Probate Court. You can verify them with one phone call." "Or," Brennan said, "you found out the owner died and decided to come back and help yourself to the inventory." The accusation hung in the air between them. Augustus felt anger rising but pushed it down, forced himself to stay calm. This was going wrong fast, and losing his temper would only make it worse. "Officer," Augustus said carefully, "I have been working in this store since I was 15 years old. I have been the owner for 8 years. I have customers, business associates, other jewelers in the area who can verify exactly who I am. If you want to call someone, I can give you numbers right now." "What I want," Brennan said, pulling handcuffs from his belt, "is for you to put your hands behind your back." "What?" Augustus took a step backward. "You're arresting me? You're in a jewelry store that isn't registered to you. You've got keys and access, and you've got loose diamonds on the counter. That's enough for me." "This is registered to me," Augustus said, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. "The paperwork is being processed. I just showed you documentation. This is my business." "Turn around," Brennan said, coming around the counter. "Hands behind your back. Now." Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. If you believe that success shouldn't make you a suspect, then hit that like and subscribe button and join the Cops Cam Archives family. Augustus put his hands behind his back because he knew exactly what happened to black men who didn't comply with police orders, even when those orders were completely illegal. Brennan snapped the handcuffs on tight, metal biting into Augustus's wrists, and pushed him toward the front of the store near the windows where anyone walking past could see him standing there in restraints. "You're making a huge mistake," Augustus said, his voice controlled, but his face showing the strain of staying calm. "I am the owner of this store. You can verify that with one phone call." "I'll verify it downtown," Brennan said. He pulled out his radio. "This is Unit 34. I need backup at 3215 Peachtree Road. I've got a suspect in custody for burglary and possession of stolen property." "This isn't stolen property," Augustus said, louder now. "This is my inventory from my store." Brennan ignored him and walked back behind the counter, looking at the diamonds Augustus had been examining. The tools laid out for the custom work, the open display case. He started taking photos with his phone, documenting everything like it was evidence of a crime. Augustus watched him go through his workspace, touching things, moving things, treating his life's work like it was contraband. "You need a warrant to search this property. This is a private business." "I've got probable cause," Brennan said without looking up. "Suspected burglary in progress gives me all the authority I need." "There is no burglary in progress." Augustus's voice finally broke through his calm. "I was working in my own store on a custom piece for a client." Through the window, people were starting to notice. A woman stopped on the sidewalk, pulled out her phone, and started recording. Another pedestrian slowed down, looking concerned. Augustus saw them and felt a wave of humiliation wash over him. He was standing in his own store, handcuffed, being treated like a criminal while strangers watched. A patrol car pulled up outside and another officer got out. This one was younger, maybe late 20s, with the name tag Sutton on his uniform. He walked into the store and looked at Augustus, then at Brennan. "What have we got?" Sutton asked. "Caught him in here with keys and access, loose diamonds on the counter, claims he owns the place, but the business is registered to someone else," Brennan said. "Pretty obvious what's happening." Sutton walked over and looked at the business license on their wall. "Says Loretta Caldwell." "That's his aunt," Brennan said, his tone making it clear he thought it was a lie. "Claims she died and left him the business." "She did die and she did leave me the business," Augustus said, looking directly at Sutton. 8 years ago, the registration is in probate transfer. I have documentation right there on the counter. I have an attorney who can verify everything. I have customers who've been coming here for decades, but he won't make a single phone call to check. Sutton picked up the folder Augustus had pulled out and actually looked through it. He read the probate documents, looked at the will, checked the business insurance policy. His expression shifted slightly. "Barrett, these look legitimate," Sutton said quietly. "They could be forged," Brennan said. "These guys are good at making fake documents." "These guys?" Augustus repeated, and there was steel in his voice now. "What guys are you talking about, officer?" Brennan's face flushed, but he didn't answer. Sutton looked uncomfortable. He glanced at Augustus, then at Brennan, then back at the documents. "Maybe we should verify this before we transport him. Just call the probate court, check the business registry. It'll take 5 minutes." "We'll verify it downtown," Brennan said firmly. "I'm not standing around here while he spins stories. I know what I saw." "What you saw," Augustus said, his voice shaking with controlled anger now, "was a black man in an expensive store, and you couldn't imagine any scenario where that was legitimate. So you walked in here, accused me of a crime I didn't commit, refused to verify basic facts, and arrested me in my own business." "You're not the owner," Brennan insisted. "Yes, I am," Augustus said. "And when this is over, when you finally do the work you should have done before you put these handcuffs on me, you're going to realize you just destroyed your career because you couldn't see past your own racism." The door chimed and Miranda walked in for her shift. She was a white woman in her mid-20s who'd worked at their store for 3 years. She saw Augustus in handcuffs and her face went white. "Oh my God, what's happening?" she asked. "Augustus?" "Miranda," Augustus said, relief flooding his voice. Tell them I own this store." Miranda looked at the officers. "He does own this store. I work for him. What are you doing? Why is he in handcuffs?" Brennan turned to her. "You work here?" "Yes, I'm the afternoon sales associate. Augustus is my boss. He's owned this place for years. His Aunt Loretta started it decades ago." Brennan's jaw tightened. The situation was starting to slip away from him, but he wasn't backing down. "How do I know you're not in on it? Maybe you're part of whatever operation he's running." Miranda stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Operation? This is a jewelry store. We sell rings and necklaces. What are you talking about?" Sutton put his hand on Brennan's shoulder. "Barrett, we need to verify this, right now, before this goes any further." Brennan pulled away from him. "I'm transporting him for processing. We'll sort it out there." He grabbed Augustus by the arm and started walking him toward the door. Miranda pulled out her phone and started filming. The woman outside was still recording. Sutton stood in the middle of the store looking like he wanted to stop this, but didn't know how. Augustus let Brennan walk him out of his store, past the windows full of jewelry he'd spent years curating, past his aunt's legacy, past his reputation, and into the back of a police car while people on the sidewalk watched and recorded and wondered what crime could possibly justify what they were seeing. Brennan drove Augustus to the Atlanta Police Department's Zone 2 precinct on Peachtree Road, just a few miles from the jewelry store. The entire ride, Augustus said nothing. He just sat in the back seat with his hands cuffed behind him, staring straight ahead, his jaw tight. Brennan kept glancing in the rearview mirror like he expected Augustus to say something, to beg, to confess. But Augustus gave him nothing. They pulled into the precinct parking lot, and Brennan got out, opened the back door, and walked Augustus inside through the side entrance that led directly to the booking area. A desk sergeant looked up as they came in. "What have you got, Brennan?" the sergeant asked. "Burglary suspect," Brennan said. "Caught him in Savannah fine jewelry with keys and access. Had loose diamonds out on the counter. Claims he owns the place, but the registration doesn't match his name." The sergeant looked at Augustus, then at Brennan. "Did you verify his story?" "I've got documentation right here that proves it's his store," Sutton said, walking in behind them, holding the folder Augustus had shown them. He must have driven separately. "His aunt left it to him in probate. I think we need to check this before we process him." Brennan's face went red. "The business is registered to Loretta Caldwell, not him." "Because she's dead," Sutton said, his voice strained, "and he inherited it. That's what probate means." Before Brennan could respond, the desk sergeant's phone rang. He answered it, listened for a moment, and his expression changed completely. He looked at Augustus, then at Brennan, then back at the phone. "Yes, ma'am," the sergeant said. "He's here right now. Yes, ma'am, I understand." He hung up and stood up from his desk. "Take the cuffs off him." "What?" Brennan said. "Take the cuffs off him right now," the sergeant repeated, and his voice had gone cold. "That was Captain Morrison. She just got off the phone with the city attorney, who got a call from this man's lawyer." He looked at Augustus. "Your attorney is Victoria Cross?" "Yes," Augustus said quietly. The sergeant's face went even more serious. "She's on her way here, and she is not happy." He looked at Brennan. "Do you have any idea who you just arrested?" "Some guy who broke into a jewelry store," Brennan said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "He didn't break into anything," the sergeant said. "He owns Savannah fine jewelry. It's been verified. Probate court confirms the estate transfer. The Buckhead Business Association confirms he's been a member for 8 years. His insurance company confirms he's the policyholder. His accountant confirms he files taxes as the business owner. And about 40 different people have already called this precinct in the last 20 minutes, telling us we just arrested one of the most respected jewelers in Atlanta." The booking area went completely quiet. Brennan stared at the sergeant. "The registration said?" "The registration is in probate transfer," Sutton said, holding up the documents, "which is right here in black and white if you'd bothered to read it, instead of deciding he was guilty the second you saw him." The sergeant came around the desk and personally unlocked Augustus's handcuffs. They came off and Augustus brought his hands forward, rubbing his wrists where the metal had cut into his skin. The marks were deep and red and would probably bruise. "Mr. Caldwell, I apologize for this," the sergeant said. "This should never have happened." Augustus didn't respond. He just looked at Brennan with an expression that was absolutely freezing. The door to the precinct opened, and a woman in her 50s walked in, wearing an expensive suit and carrying a briefcase. Victoria Cross, Augustus's attorney. She took one look at the scene and her eyes went hard. "Which one of you put handcuffs on my client?" she asked. Brennan raised his hand slightly, and in that moment he looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Victoria walked straight to Augustus and examined his wrists. "Did they photograph these marks?" "Not yet," the sergeant said. "Do it now," Victoria said. "We're going to need them for the lawsuit." She turned to Brennan. "Officer, what's your name and badge number?" "Curtis Brennan, badge 2847, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Officer Brennan," Victoria said, her voice like ice. "You just arrested a man in his own business, refused to verify his identity, ignored documentation proving his ownership, and transported him here based on nothing but the color of his skin. My client owns a jewelry store worth approximately $2.3 million. He has been a respected member of the Atlanta business community for nearly a decade. He has zero criminal record, and you treated him like a common thief because you couldn't imagine a black man legitimately owning something valuable." Brennan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "We're filing a federal civil rights lawsuit by the end of the week," Victoria continued. "We're seeking $8 million in damages, and I'm going to make sure everyone in this city knows exactly what you did today." Augustus finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "I want the security footage from my store. All of it, from the moment he walked in until the moment he dragged me out in handcuffs in front of my customers." "Already requested it," Victoria said. She looked at the sergeant. "We'll be in touch." She guided Augustus toward the door. As they walked out, Augustus looked back at Brennan one last time. The officer was standing there surrounded by his colleagues, all of whom were looking at him like he'd just detonated a bomb in the middle of the precinct. Curtis Brennan was placed on administrative leave before the end of that day. Captain Morrison called him into her office 2 hours after Augustus walked out of the precinct and told him to turn in his badge and his weapon. The investigation would be handled by Internal Affairs and the city attorney's office, but everyone already knew how it was going to end. The security footage from Savannah Fine Jewelry told the entire story in high-definition color. The footage showed Augustus working peacefully in his own store, examining diamonds for a custom piece. It showed Brennan stopping outside, staring through the window, his hand moving to his weapon before he even entered. It showed him walking in aggressive and accusatory from the first word. It showed Augustus calmly explaining who he was, offering documentation, giving the names of people who could verify his identity. It showed Brennan dismissing everything, refusing to make a single phone call, and arresting Augustus while Miranda walked in and confirmed everything Augustus had been saying. The footage went public within 48 hours. Someone leaked it to the media and it spread across social media like wildfire. Millions of people watched a successful black business owner get handcuffed and arrested in his own store by a cop who couldn't imagine he belonged there. The outrage was immediate and overwhelming. Victoria Cross filed the federal lawsuit exactly when she said she would. The complaint was 37 pages long and detailed every violation: false arrest, illegal detention, deprivation of rights under color of law, racial profiling, infliction of emotional distress, and damage to Augustus's reputation in business. The suit named Brennan personally and the Atlanta Police Department for failing to properly train and supervise their officers. It sought $8 million in compensatory and punitive damages. The city tried to settle quietly within the first month. They offered $2 million if Augustus would sign a non-disclosure agreement and agree not to speak publicly about the incident. Augustus refused. This wasn't about money. This was about accountability. The case went to trial 9 months later in federal court. The jury heard testimony from Augustus about the humiliation of being arrested in his own store, about customers who stopped coming because they'd seen him in handcuffs and assumed he must have done something wrong, about the damage to a reputation he'd spent years building. They heard from Miranda, who described watching her boss get dragged out while she stood there helpless. They heard from other business owners on Peachtree Road who testified that Augustus was exactly who he said he was, and that everyone in the area knew it. They heard from other victims, too. The investigation into Brennan's history uncovered a pattern that the department had ignored for years. He'd stopped black drivers in Buckhead at 3 times the rate he stopped white drivers. He'd arrested black shoppers in high-end stores for suspicious behavior that never resulted in charges. He'd filed reports full of assumptions and bias that his supervisors had rubber-stamped without question. Augustus wasn't the first person Brennan had profiled. He was just the first one with the resources to fight back. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Brennan liable on every count. The damages came back at $6.8 million. Brennan was personally liable for $1 million. The Atlanta Police Department was liable for the rest. But the civil verdict wasn't the end. The Department of Justice had opened its own investigation and filed federal criminal charges against Brennan for deprivation of rights under color of law. The case was straightforward and the evidence was overwhelming. Brennan was convicted and sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. He lost everything. His career was over. His pension was gone. His name was synonymous with racial profiling and abuse of authority. When he got out of prison, he was 51 years old with a felony record and no prospects. He worked at a car wash in Marietta making minimum wage, a cautionary tale about what happens when you let racism guide your badge. The Atlanta Police Department paid the full settlement and implemented sweeping changes. Mandatory training on implicit bias, new protocols for verification before arrest, a civilian review board with real power to investigate complaints, body cameras that couldn't be turned off during interactions. Brennan's case became required viewing in the police academy under the title, How Not to Police. Augustus returned to his store the day after the arrest. He opened on schedule, served his customers, continued the work his aunt had started decades ago. But something had changed. He installed additional security cameras not to protect against burglars, but to protect himself from police. He kept copies of all his documentation in multiple locations, ready to produce at a moment's notice. He knew now that success and legitimacy weren't enough protection when someone looked at him and saw only skin color. The custom engagement ring he'd been working on when Brennan walked in was finished 2 weeks later. The client came to pick it up, and when she saw it, she cried because it was perfect. Augustus didn't tell her that the diamonds she was looking at were the same ones that had been on the counter when he was arrested. He just smiled and handed her the ring and accepted her thanks and went back to work. The store is still there at 3215 Peachtree Road, a fixture in Buckhead for over 3 decades now. Augustus still works behind that counter, still designs custom pieces, still maintains the legacy his Aunt Loretta built. But on the wall next to her photo, there's now a framed copy of the jury verdict. Not because he needs the money or wants to celebrate the lawsuit, but because it's a reminder that justice, however slowly and painfully, can still work when people refuse to accept injustice. Curtis Brennan spent his 3 years in prison thinking about the 15 seconds that destroyed his life. 15 seconds of looking through a window, seeing a black man with jewelry, and deciding that couldn't possibly be legitimate. 15 seconds that cost him his career, his freedom, his future, and exposed him as exactly what he was, a man who wore a badge but never understood what it was supposed to mean. This is what accountability looks like when the system actually works. If you believe no one should be treated like a criminal for existing while black, share this story. And if you want more real stories where justice wins, subscribe to Cops Cam Archives. We're not stopping until every story like this gets the attention it deserves. The end.